My name is Ophelia Whitmore, I'm 28 years old, and I just watched my best friend take credit for everything I've given her while standing next to a man I'd never seen before in my life. The sound of applause still rings in my ears. But all I can hear is betrayal. Let me start from the beginning, because this story starts long before today's ribbon-cutting ceremony at Sage and Time, the bakery that was supposed to be our dream come true. 3 years ago, my grandmother Constance Whitmore passed away at 91, leaving me her entire estate. Grandma Constance wasn't just wealthy, she was formidable. She'd built a small empire from a single boarding house she'd inherited in the 1950s, turning it into a chain of boutique hotels across New England. When she died, I inherited $2 million for properties and a letter written in her careful script that changed everything. Dearest Ophelia, it read, money is only as valuable as what you do with it. I've watched you these 25 years, and I know you have a generous heart. Sometimes too generous for your own good. Use this inheritance wisely, but don't be afraid to help those you love. Just remember, true friends will never let you forget your generosity, but false ones will pretend it never happened. At the time, I thought I understood what she meant. Now, standing in a bakery filled with people congratulating my best friend, Penelope Ashwood, on her incredible business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit, I realized Grandma Constance was trying to warn me. Penelope and I had been inseparable since college. We met in a literature class at Smith, bonding over our shared love of Jane Austen and our dreams of doing something meaningful with our lives. She was everything I wasn't: confident, charismatic, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. I was the quiet one, the planner, the one who did the research while she pitched the ideas. After graduation, we moved to Boston together. I worked as a literary agent's assistant while Penelope bounced between various creative pursuits: photography, writing, interior design. She had talent but struggled with follow-through. Meanwhile, I was methodical, saving money, building connections, waiting for the right opportunity. When Grandma Constance died, that opportunity seemed to present itself. Ophelia, we should open a bakery, Penelope had said one evening, flour in her hair from another experimental batch of lavender scones. You know how much I love baking, and you have such a head for business. Plus, now you have the capital to make it happen. She wasn't wrong. Penelope did love baking, it was one of her genuine passions, something she'd been doing since childhood. And I did have a head for business, plus enough money to make any reasonable dream a reality. Think about it, she'd continued, her eyes bright with excitement. A cozy neighborhood bakery with fresh bread, artisanal pastries, maybe a small cafe section. We could make it the heart of the community. The vision was intoxicating. After years of working for other people, building other people's dreams, the idea of creating something entirely our own felt like destiny. We'd be partners, I'd said carefully. Equal partners. Of course. 50-50 on everything. I'll handle the creative side, recipes, presentation, customer service. You handle the business side, permits, accounting, marketing. We'll be perfect complements. That night, I'd called my financial advisor and began the process of liquidating enough assets to fund our dream. The next 18 months were a whirlwind of permits, contractors, recipe testing, and planning. I threw myself into the project with the intensity of someone who'd finally found her calling. Every day was filled with meetings with city planners, negotiations with suppliers, interviews with potential employees. Penelope was enthusiastic but inconsistent. She'd disappear for days, claiming she was researching artisanal techniques or drawing inspiration from European cafe culture. Meanwhile, I was handling the tedious but crucial work of actually building a business. I found and negotiated the lease for our perfect location, a corner spot in Cambridge with huge windows and original brick walls. The rent was steep, but I knew it would be worth it. I designed the layout, hired the contractors, and managed the renovation that transformed a tired old restaurant into the warm, inviting space we'd envisioned. While Penelope experimented with recipes in her apartment kitchen, I was establishing relationships with local farms for our ingredients, setting up accounts with specialty suppliers, and creating the systems that would keep us running smoothly. I registered our business name, obtained our food service licenses, and navigated the maze of health department regulations. The financial investment kept growing. What started as a projected $200,000 became $350,000, then $500,000. Every time a new expense arose, better equipment, unexpected renovation costs, extended timeline costs, I covered it without hesitation. This was our dream, and I wanted it to be perfect. You're incredible, Ophelia, Penelope would say whenever I updated her on progress. I don't know how I'd do this without you. You're making all our dreams come true. I believed her. More importantly, I believed in us. But somewhere around month 12, Things began to shift in ways I didn't immediately recognize. Penelope started bringing her new boyfriend Marcus around to help with taste testing. Marcus Wellington was everything you'd expect from someone with a name like that: prep school educated, trust fund supported, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance despite never having accomplished anything meaningful. "You know, Penny," he'd say, and I hated that he called her Penny, "you really have a gift for this. These recipes are restaurant quality. You could easily expand this into a whole chain of bakeries." Penelope would beam under his praise while I continued running numbers, managing suppliers, and handling the 1,000 details that would actually make the bakery successful. Marcus started inserting himself into our conversations about the business. "Penny's been telling me about your marketing strategy," he'd say to me, "and I think there are some real opportunities you're missing. My family has connections in the food industry." His family's connections turned out to be his uncle, who owned a seafood restaurant in the Hamptons, but Penelope hung on his every word as if he were a business oracle. The final straw came when I walked into the bakery during construction one afternoon and found Marcus measuring spaces with a contractor I didn't recognize. "What's going on?" I asked. "Oh, Ophelia." Penelope appeared from the back room, slightly flustered. Marcus had some ideas about optimizing the layout for better flow. "We were just exploring options." "Without discussing it with me first?" "It's not a big deal," Marcus interjected. "Just some suggestions. No need to get territorial." Territorial. About the business I was funding entirely with my inheritance. That night, I had a long conversation with Penelope about boundaries and partnership expectations. She apologized profusely, promised that Marcus would step back, and assured me that nothing would change between us. I should have seen the warning signs. I should have listened to the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Grandma Constance, warning me about people who take credit while avoiding responsibility. Instead, I chose trust. I chose friendship. I chose to believe that the person I'd known for 7 years would never betray me. The bakery opened on a crisp October morning, exactly 20 months after Penelope first pitched the idea. The launch was everything we'd dreamed of: lines out the door, local food bloggers taking photos, customers raving about the lavender honey scones and rosemary focaccia. But even in that moment of triumph, I noticed something troubling. When the local newspaper reporter asked about the bakery's origin story, Penelope stepped forward to answer. "I've been passionate about baking since childhood," she said, smiling for the camera. "When I finally decided to turn that passion into a business, everything just fell into place. Sometimes when you're following your true calling, the universe conspires to help you succeed." The universe. As if my inheritance was some cosmic accident rather than the concrete financial foundation that made everything possible. "And what about your partner?" the reporter asked, nodding toward me. "Oh, Ophelia has been wonderful. She's helped with so many of the business details. I couldn't have done it without her support." Support. As if I were an enthusiastic cheerleader rather than an equal partner who'd funded the entire venture. That article appeared in the lifestyle section the following week. "Local woman turns passion into profit," read the headline, accompanied by a photo of Penelope arranging pastries in our display case. I was mentioned in the final paragraph as her business partner, who provided assistance with operational details. I told myself it didn't matter. The business was successful, customers loved what we were doing, and media attention was good for growth. Who cared about credit as long as we were thriving? But the pattern continued. When the Cambridge Business Association invited us to speak at their monthly luncheon, Penelope accepted on behalf of Sage and Times founder. When food bloggers visited, she positioned herself as the creative visionary while introducing me as the person who handles our books. Meanwhile, Marcus became increasingly present. He started showing up during business hours, chatting with customers, and offering unsolicited advice to our employees. When I mentioned this to Penelope, she said he was just being supportive of her dream. Her dream. Not our dream anymore. The breaking point came during our 6-month review meeting. We were sitting in the small office above the bakery, going over our financial reports, when Penelope brought up expansion. "Marcus thinks we should consider opening a second location," she said casually. "Maybe something in Beacon Hill, more upscale." "That's a big decision," I replied. "We'd need significant additional capital, and we should probably establish stronger profitability here first." "Well, Marcus's family might be willing to invest. They've been really impressed with what I've built here." What she'd built. The phrase hit me like cold water. "Penelope, you mean what we've built? This is a partnership, remember?" She looked uncomfortable. "Of course, but you know what I mean. The creative vision, the recipes, the brand identity, that's really my contribution. You've been more of a silent partner." Silent partner. As if providing all the funding, handling all the business operations, and working 60-hour weeks. for 6 months made me a silent investor rather than an equal partner. I think we need to clarify our partnership agreement, I said carefully. Maybe put some things in writing that we assumed were understood. Ophelia, you're being paranoid. We're best friends. Why do we need legal documents between us? But something had fundamentally shifted. I could feel it in the way she talked about the business, the way she accepted praise, the way she positioned herself as the sole visionary behind our success. That night, I called my lawyer. Attorney Sarah Chen was a friend from college who'd specialized in business law. When I explained the situation, her first question was blunt: do you have any written partnership agreement? No, we did everything on trust. I funded the business. She provided the recipes and concept. We agreed to split everything 50-50. But nothing in writing? No documentation of your financial contribution? No formal business structure? My stomach dropped. The business is registered as a sole proprietorship under her name. I thought it would be simpler for the initial setup. We were going to formalize everything once we were established. Sarah's silence was telling. Ophelia, legally speaking, you have very little recourse. If the business is registered in her name and you have no written agreement documenting your contribution, you're essentially in the position of having made a large gift. But I have bank records showing the transfers, which could be interpreted as loans, gifts, or investments, depending on how she chooses to characterize them. Without written agreements, partnership law becomes very complicated. I spent the following week consulting with 2 other attorneys. The message was consistent: without written documentation, proving a partnership would be difficult and expensive, with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, things at the bakery continued to deteriorate. Marcus was now there daily, acting like a co-owner and making suggestions about everything from our supplier relationships to our staffing decisions. When I objected to his presence, Penelope accused me of being possessive and controlling. Marcus is just trying to help, she said. He has a lot of great ideas about growing the business. This is supposed to be our business, not his, I replied. Well, maybe it's time to think about what's best for Sage and Time's future, rather than clinging to the past. The past. As if our 7-year friendship and my entire inheritance were ancient history rather than the foundation of everything we'd built together. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to fight an increasingly futile battle, I would document everything that was happening. If Penelope wanted to rewrite history, I would make sure the truth was preserved. I started keeping detailed records of every conversation, every decision, every moment where my contributions were minimized or erased. I gathered financial documents showing exactly how much of my inheritance had funded the business. I collected emails, text messages, and any other evidence of our original partnership agreement. Most importantly, I began planning my exit strategy. The opportunity to leave with dignity came sooner than expected. 2 months after my conversations with the lawyers, Penelope announced that she and Marcus were engaged. Isn't it wonderful, she gushed, showing off a diamond ring that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Marcus proposed at the Cape last weekend. We're thinking of a spring wedding. I congratulated her with as much enthusiasm as I could muster, but inside I was calculating. If she was marrying Marcus, his increasing involvement in the business would become permanent. Soon I'd be the third wheel in what was supposed to be my own partnership. We're thinking of having the engagement party here at the bakery, she continued. A nice evening event with all our friends and family. It would be great publicity too. Our bakery, which I'd funded entirely, was going to be the venue for celebrating her engagement to the man who was systematically erasing my role in the business. That night, I made my decision. I would sell my interest in the business to Penelope and Marcus, use the proceeds to start fresh somewhere else, and count myself lucky to escape before things got worse. When I broached the subject with Penelope, her relief was palpable. That might be for the best, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Marcus and I have been talking about taking the business in new directions, and it would be easier with unified vision. Unified vision. Translation: they wanted me out. We agreed on a buyout price that was roughly half of what I'd invested, a significant loss, but enough to start over. I told myself I was paying for a valuable lesson about friendship, business, and the importance of written agreements. The paperwork took 3 weeks to finalize. During that time, Penelope was effusive with gratitude and promises to stay in touch. You're such an amazing friend for making this transition so smooth, she said. I know we'll always be close, no matter what. I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, part of me still hoped that once the business stress was removed, we could salvage our friendship. I should have known better. Today was supposed to be a celebration of Sage and Time's 1-year anniversary. Penelope had rebranded it as a grand reopening to showcase the renovations and menu expansions that Marcus had funded after my departure. I almost didn't come. After 3 months of radio silence from my former best friend, despite multiple attempts to reach out, I knew our friendship was over. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what they'd done with our dream. The bakery looked beautiful. They'd expanded into the space next door, added a full coffee bar, and created a small seating area with the kind of rustic chic aesthetic that would photograph well for Instagram. It was everything we'd talked about doing during our planning phase, finally realized with Marcus's family money. I arrived early, hoping to avoid the crowds and maybe have a quiet moment to say goodbye to the space I'd helped create. But as I approached the front door, I saw Penelope inside, wearing a stunning dress and preparing for what was clearly going to be a major media event. A local television crew was setting up equipment. Food bloggers were arranging their cameras. The mayor was scheduled to attend for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I almost left. This wasn't my celebration anymore, and I had no desire to watch Penelope bask in praise for achievements built on my inheritance. But something made me stay, maybe masochism, maybe closure, maybe the faint hope that she'd acknowledge my role in front of all these people. The ceremony began at 11. Penelope stood behind a podium, radiant in the morning light streaming through the windows I'd chosen, addressing a crowd of supporters in the space I'd designed. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to be the center of attention. "1 year ago, I had a dream of creating something special in this community. A place where people could gather, where artisanal food could bring us together, where local ingredients could be transformed into something beautiful." She talked about her vision, her passion, her commitment to excellence. She thanked the local suppliers, the staff, the customers who'd made the bakery a success. Then she turned to Marcus, who was standing beside her in a perfectly tailored suit, beaming with pride. "Most of all, I want to thank my fiancé, Marcus Wellington, whose support and belief in my dream made all of this possible. His business acumen, his connections, and his unwavering faith in my abilities turned a small bakery into the thriving business you see today. This success belongs to both of us, and I can't wait to see what we build together next." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Marcus stepped forward to accept the praise, placing his arm around Penelope's waist in a gesture of ownership that made my stomach turn. Not a single word about the inheritance that had funded the original bakery. Not a mention of the 18 months I'd spent building the foundation that made everything else possible. Not even an acknowledgement that I had ever existed. I stood in the back of the crowd, invisible among the well-wishers and supporters, watching my former best friend take full credit for achievements built on my sacrifice while crediting her success to a man who'd appeared halfway through the story. That's when I understood what Grandma Constance had been trying to tell me. True friends acknowledge your generosity not because they want more from you, but because they understand that gifts come from love and deserve recognition. False friends erase your contributions because acknowledging them would complicate the narrative they're trying to sell. I left before the ribbon cutting. As I walked away from Sage and Time for the last time, I wasn't thinking about the money I'd lost or the friendship I'd been naive to trust. I was thinking about Grandma Constance's letter, and her final piece of advice: use this inheritance wisely, but don't be afraid to help those you love. Just remember to love wisely too. It had taken me $500,000 in 28 years to understand the difference between loving someone and loving them wisely. But now I did. 6 months later, I moved to Portland and opened my own small consulting firm, helping women entrepreneurs navigate the legal and financial complexities of starting businesses. My first client was a young woman whose best friend had convinced her to fund their joint venture without any written agreements. "Don't make my mistake," I told her as we drafted partnership documents that would protect her investment and establish clear ownership stakes. "Friendship and business are both beautiful things, but they need different kinds of foundations." Last week, I saw that Sage and Time had expanded to 3 locations. Penelope and Marcus were featured in a regional magazine as power couples to watch in the food industry. The article mentioned that they'd bootstrapped their first location with personal savings, before attracting investor interest for expansion. Personal savings. I suppose that's one way to describe inheriting $2 million from your grandmother and giving it to someone who later erased you from the story entirely. But here's what Penelope and Marcus will never understand: true success isn't about taking credit for achievements you didn't earn. It's about building something meaningful with integrity, acknowledging the people who helped you get there, and remembering that every opportunity is built on someone else's sacrifice. My consulting firm may be smaller than their bakery empire, but it's mine. Every client I help, every contract I draft, every successful business launch I facilitate is built on lessons learned from my own betrayal, and unlike Penelope's version of success, mine doesn't require erasing anyone else from the story. Grandma Constance was right about money being only as valuable as what you do with it. What she didn't mention is that sometimes the most valuable thing money can buy is the knowledge of who deserves your trust, and who doesn't? That lesson was worth every penny of my inheritance, even if it took me 2 years and $500,000 to learn it. Some gifts teach you about generosity. Others teach you about wisdom. The best gifts, if you're paying attention, teach you about both. 2 years have passed since that painful morning at the grand reopening, and I've learned that healing doesn't follow a straight line. Some days I wake up grateful for the lesson that freed me from a toxic friendship. Other days, I still feel the sting of betrayal and wonder how someone I trusted completely could erase me so thoroughly from a story we wrote together. But today, sitting in my Portland office overlooking the Willamette River, I can honestly say that losing my inheritance to Penelope was the best investment I ever made, not because of what it bought, but because of what it taught me. My consulting firm, Whitmore Advisory, now employs 6 people. We specialize in helping women and minorities navigate the complex world of business partnerships, funding agreements, and intellectual property protection. Every day, I meet with entrepreneurs who remind me of my younger self, brilliant, passionate, and dangerously trusting. Just last month, I worked with Isabella Santos, a talented chef whose culinary school roommate had convinced her to fund their restaurant concept with her entire savings. The roommate was handling all the business stuff, while Isabella focused on menu development. When Isabella came to me, she'd already invested $80,000 and was growing suspicious about why she wasn't seeing any financial documentation. She keeps saying we don't need formal paperwork because we're like sisters, Isabella told me, tears in her eyes. But when I asked to see the lease agreement or the vendor contracts, she always has an excuse. I helped Isabella discover that the restaurant was registered solely in her roommate's name, with no documentation of Isabella's financial contributions. Unlike my situation, we caught it early enough to protect Isabella's interests and establish a proper partnership agreement that reflected her investment. How did you know to ask these questions? Isabella asked as we reviewed the final contracts. Experience, I replied. Expensive experience. That conversation reminded me of something I'd been considering for months. There were thousands of women out there making the same mistake I'd made, trusting friendship to protect business interests. They needed to hear my story, not as a cautionary tale of victimhood, but as a roadmap for recognizing red flags and protecting themselves. I started writing a book. The Trust Fund, Why Smart Women Make Foolish Business Decisions, took me 18 months to complete. It weaves together my personal story with practical advice about partnership agreements, financial documentation, and the psychology of exploitative relationships. The publisher was initially skeptical. Business books by unknown authors don't typically sell well, but early readers responded powerfully to the combination of personal narrative and actionable guidance. The book launched 3 months ago. Last week, it hit the bestseller list for business memoirs, and I've been invited to speak at conferences across the country about women's entrepreneurship and financial literacy. The speaking engagements have been unexpectedly healing. Every time I tell my story, I meet women who've lived variations of it. Some lost money to romantic partners who promised to handle the business side of their creative ventures. Others were erased from companies they'd co-founded by male colleagues, who gradually marginalized their contributions. A surprising number had experienced friendship-based financial betrayals similar to mine. The hardest part, a woman named Jennifer told me after a presentation in Chicago, isn't losing the money. It's losing the story. When someone erases your role in creating something you funded and built, they steal your history. She was right. The financial loss was painful, but the historical erasure was devastating. That's why I'd started documenting everything, preserving the evidence that I had existed in that story. Even if Penelope preferred to pretend otherwise, which brings me to yesterday's unexpected phone call. Ophelia? It's Penelope. I almost hung up. 2 years of silence, and suddenly she was calling on a random Tuesday afternoon as if no time had passed at all. I saw your book, she continued before I could respond. And the interview you did on that morning show last week. I waited. Let her fill the silence. I wanted you to know that I never meant for things to happen the way they did. The business just grew beyond what either of us expected, and Marcus had so many ideas, and everything moved so fast. Still, I said nothing. The thing is, we're facing some challenges now. The second and third locations aren't performing as well as we'd hoped, and we're having some issues with our investors. Marcus thought, we thought maybe you might have some advice. Given your expertise now. The audacity was breathtaking. After erasing me from their success story, they wanted me to help solve their problems. After rewriting history to exclude my contributions, they were asking for my professional guidance. Penelope, I said finally, I don't think that would be appropriate. Please, Ophelia. I know I made mistakes. I know I didn't handle things well. But we used to be best friends. Doesn't that count for something? It used to count for everything, I replied. That's why it hurt so much when you threw it away. I never threw it away. Things got complicated with the business and Marcus, and you stood in front of a crowd of people and thanked everyone who made your success possible except the person who funded it. You credited your achievements to a man who showed up halfway through the story while erasing the friend who made it all possible. That wasn't complicated, Penelope. That was a choice. I can fix this, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. I can make a public statement, give you credit, whatever you want. Just please help us. The bakery, it's everything. To me. No, I said gently. It was everything to both of us. That was the problem. I hung up before she could respond. An hour later, I received a text message, I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I stared at that message for a long time. 2 years ago, those words might have meant everything to me. Now, they felt like too little, too late, not because I'm incapable of forgiveness, but because some betrayals change the fundamental nature of a relationship beyond repair. I didn't respond to her text. Instead, I opened my laptop and started writing the final chapter of my next book, a deeper exploration of how women can rebuild after professional and personal betrayals. Because while Penelope's apology couldn't change our history, it reminded me that my story isn't really about her anymore. It's about the woman who learned to value herself enough to walk away from people who diminish her contributions. It's about the entrepreneur who turned a painful lesson into a thriving business, helping others avoid similar mistakes. It's about the author whose vulnerability created a roadmap for other women navigating the intersection of friendship and business. Most importantly, it's about understanding that sometimes the people who take the most from us also give us the most valuable gifts, the motivation to become stronger, wiser, and more selective about who deserves access to our generosity. Grandma Constance's inheritance didn't just fund a bakery that was ultimately stolen from me. It funded my education in human nature, business strategy, and the difference between being kind and being foolish. That education has already returned more than the original investment, both financially and personally. Tomorrow, I'm flying to Seattle to keynote a conference for women entrepreneurs. Next month, my publisher wants to discuss a second book deal. And next week, I'm meeting with a potential business partner, another consultant who specializes in legal protection for creative professionals. We're considering joining forces to create a comprehensive resource for women starting businesses with friends. This time, we're starting with written agreements, clear boundaries, and the understanding that friendship and business partnership require different kinds of trust. This time, I'm applying everything Penelope taught me about protecting my interests while still remaining open to genuine collaboration. The irony isn't lost on me. In trying to erase me from one success story, Penelope inadvertently became the catalyst for a much bigger one. My consulting firm, my book, my speaking career, my expertise in partnership protection, none of it would exist without her betrayal. So in a strange way, I am grateful to her. Not for stealing my inheritance or erasing my contributions, but for teaching me that my worth isn't determined by other people's acknowledgement. My value doesn't disappear when someone chooses not to see it. The bakery she built with my money may bear her name, but the business I built from the ashes bears mine. And unlike her version of success, mine doesn't require diminishing anyone else to shine brightly. That, I've learned, is the difference between borrowed success and earned success. Between taking credit and deserving credit. Between building on someone else's foundation and creating your own solid ground. Some gifts teach you about generosity. Others teach you about wisdom. The best gifts teach you that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of building on your own.
Do you enjoy stories with emotion and twists? Then like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Here, every word touches you.